Torah portion, Vaikra, and it's a shame that some people translate Vaikra as Leviticus. This is not the translation of Vaikra. Vaikra is not. Hold on, let me put in my head. Oh, I'm not gonna put in my headset. Vaikra is not Leviticus. Vaikra is, and he called. And so in that context, let us go to the Rashi, because the whole real beginning, what I'd like to do is talk about first of all, the Baal HaTurim's explanation of the word Vayikra. And after that, we're going to get to the Lubavitcher Rebbe's explanation. And then after that, we'll get to the Dudai Ruvain's explanation. And then after that, we'll get to Rabbi Soloveitchik's. So hit the big ones today. We're going to hit the big ones. Vayikra is actually a love story. Some people look at the word Vayikra, they look at the sacrifices, and they say, oh, this is boring, God forbid. It's actually a love story. The book begins with the words Vayikra, and that's what the book should be called, God called. So what does it mean, Vayikra al Moshe? So Rashi tells us at the beginning that God called out to Moshe an expression of love. You know, if you want to go on a date with somebody you love, you're going to call first, you're going to make an appointment, you're going to schedule. You're not just going to bump into them in the street and say, oh, that's not an indication of your love. But Hashem Yisbarach didn't just happen to encounter Moshe Rabbeinu. When Hashem spoke to Moshe, Hashem called to Moshe. It was a calling just for Moshe. It was a calling just for Moshe. That's what it was. Vayikra Moshe. Rashi says, Chol dibrot or kol amirot or kol tzevayim kadma kriya. Before each time that God spoke or called Moses, he called. Lashon chiba, an expression of love. This is where the angels, the ministering angels, speak to each other. As it says about the angels, they call to each other. But to the prophets of the world, they just called. God met them b'lashon arai, not in a permanent manner. And as it states, Vayikar Elokim el Bilam, God just happened upon Bilam. So the first thing that Rashi is pointing out is that God called to Moshe as an expression of love. And this call was also meant, on the one hand, just for Moshe. Only Moshe could hear it, because the call went and reached his ears, and the rest of Israel could not hear. So as Kafka says, there was a door, and the door opens only for you. There's a specific door, the door opens only for you. So that's what the message was here, that there was this call, and the call was opening only for Moshe Rabbeinu. But on the same time, Hashem Yisbarach told Moshe that the only reason why I'm talking to you is because of the Jewish people. Your greatness only comes as a result of the Jewish people. That's what Rashi says too. It says, go to them and speak to them through divrei kivushin. Speak to the Jewish people in a manner that shows that they are the essential ones. Bishvilchem, on your account, God is speaking with me. So, because we find that for all 38 years in the desert, God did not speak with the Moshe, because the Jewish people were in exile, so to speak. So this is the idea that Rashi is saying, that God's call to Moses was only for Moses and was an expression of love. Not only that, Rashi here comments, and he could have commented on this much earlier, but he says, why are there spaces and pauses in the Torah? And Rashi says, that's to give Mayu Hafsakot Mishamshot. What were the purposes of these pauses in the Torah? To gain space to Moses to understand. V'itbonein ben parsha parsha, to understand. So Hashem is giving Moshe a pause to understand, to digest, to really internalize the message of the Torah. This does not sound like a boring. This sounds like a love song. between God and Moshe Rabbeinu. And now that Moshe has built the Mishkan, now all of a sudden, finally, Hashem can engage with him. It's like a bride and groom. Once they built their home, they built their chuppah, now that they could go in and live together. And so now that the Mishkan is built, Hashem can come down and call to Moses, and they could have a union together. That's the concept as Rashi explains it. Comes along the Baal HaTurim, and the Baal HaTurim adds to this. The Baal HaTurim is so powerful here as well. The Baal HaTurim writes, Vaikra Moshe, God called to Moshe. Earlier at the end of the book of Shemot, it says, the last verse of the book of Shemot says that the cloud of the glory will be on the tent during the day. And the fire will be on it at night. For the eyes of all of Israel, with all their journeys. So the Baal HaTurim says that the last verse tells us that the fire will be on the Mishkan, and the next verse is God called to Moshe. This is telling us that because God called him and spoke to him, Moses' face shone like fire. Moses' face shone like fire. That's where the fire why was Moshe's face so radiant? Because God called to him. And then it says, B'kol Ma'asehem Vayikra Moshe. So that was just to tell us that Moshe knew when to travel when God would tell him to travel. And then the verse tells us, the Baal HaTurim tells us, the Vayikra, the first word of the portion is Vayikra, God called. But the Aleph of the word Vayikra is written small. Aleph is the first letter and it's written small. Now, actually, there's a tradition that all of the 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet have one letter where they appear big and one letter where they appear small. It's called an os rabati and an os zeira, a large letter and a small letter. And the meaning usually is that when it's written large, it's to amplify the meaning of the word. And when it's written small, it's to diminish the meaning of the word. So not always does the Baal HaTurim explain it, but in this context, he's going to tell us why the letter Aleph is written small here. He's written small. Rashi, Baal HaTurim tells us, Moshe haya kaviyachol, Moshe haya gadol v'anav. Moses was so a great and a humble person. Moshe says, I don't want to write that God called me. I don't want to write that God called me. He says, I want it to be Vayikar. That's the way God called to Bilam. When God called to Bilam, he did it in a Vayikar al Bilam, that God did it to Bilam in like a casual manner. He says, I don't want to say that God came calling on me. That's disrespectful to God, so to speak, that I'm worthy for God to come calling upon me. So Moshe wanted to write it Vayikar, like it says by Bilam. But Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God didn't want him to write it that way. God wanted him to write it Vayikra, that God called Moses. And so therefore, they compromised. And so therefore, for that reason, they wrote the Aleph, they wrote it in a small manner. They wrote it small. So this is the idea that the word Vayikra represents the compromise between God and Moses, that Moses wanted to write it in a more humble manner. But the basic idea for me, it's always been, is that we have to hear the calling, that it's our responsibility in life to look for the calling, to find out what the message from Hashem is for each of us, and to hear the call. So that's the way this portion begins. That this portion is about a calling, about coming close to Hashem. It used to be the practice that Vayikra would be the first book studied in the Cheder, in the Jewish schools. Now, if it's studied, it's usually not the first, because it's considered to be the most esoteric, but it was usually the first. Okay, let me just pause here, see if anybody has any comments on this, of what we said so far.